Hello and welcome to the Under Centre podcast. I'm your host, Darmar, and I'm joined by two members of the Irish Eurovision entry for this year's show, which got absolutely nowhere. Thanks again, lads. Fionn Malloy and Jake Woolhead. Lads, I know you must be disappointed, but hey, look, it's not as if we ever win it anyway.
Well, part of the problem was we both decided we'd go to the pub. We probably had 10 or 15 pints, and then we went to try write a song and then go sing the song in the Eurovision. So that was probably part of the problem for me.
Yeah, I think next year we'll just send them with a kilo of cocaine and see what happens.
Just as long as you don't rip off My Lovely Horse, that song is sacred. But today we are continuing our off-season series, and we are going to be talking about the Indianapolis Colts. And on the show today from the Bring the Juice podcast is Cody Felger. Corey, how are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. No problem. We're delighted to have you on, and we're really looking forward to speaking about the Colts off-season so far. But before we do, if you are watching us on YouTube, could you please like this video and subscribe to the Under Centre podcast? That's where you'll find each and every one of our shows whenever we get the chance to upload them. Also the same for our audio side of things. If you prefer the audio podcasts, just search Under Centre podcast. You'll find us there too. So subscribe to that and you'll get updated when we release our shows on that too. On our social side of things, facebook.com/Under Centre pod. Instagram and Twitter is both the same at Under Centre Pod. We're on a quest for 1,000 followers before week one of the regular season. So if you're not following us yet, go over and follow us on either of one of those platforms and help us get to 1,000 before week number one. But let's talk about the Colts. And Cody, I want to start actually with the schedule release that came out last week, because there's some interesting sort of storylines coming out from the Colts side of things. So they start with 2 home games against the Seahawks and the Rams, 2 tough NFC West sides. It includes a 13-game stretch before you get your bye week in week 14, which can be a blessing and a curse, depends on which way you see it. Like, it could help rest up before the final stretch at the end of the regular season. On the other side of things, you're playing 13 weeks in a row, if a real possibility to build up some injuries that could, stop your run towards a playoff push at the end of the season. And also, most of the divisional games will take place in that sort of 13-game stretch, with only 2 of your last 7 games coming up against an AFC South side. So what was your overall view on the 2021 schedule?
Yeah, I personally was on the side where I liked having a little bit of a later bye, especially now with adding that 17th game, right? Like, a lot of your guys hopefully will be able to get rested up for the playoffs. I mean, I even think of so the Colts have had a lot of media availability recently because they've had their mini camp and all that stuff. One of their guys, actually the guy who was probably their steal of the draft amongst a lot of good players they pulled out of the 2020 draft, Julian Blackman, even talked about how last season his legs were starting to come from under him a little bit by the end of the season. So might be good just a week for him to, and for others to just kind of rest up a little bit to make that playoff push if you're sitting pretty in that certain point in time. So personally, I'm a fan of it. It is kind of crazy. Like, it's weird for the Colts to have 2 straight home games to start the season, but the Colts have notoriously started slow. It seems like the last couple of years, especially. So, they haven't won the home opener, guys. I think maybe half a decade they haven't won an opener. It's been absolutely crazy. So I think to have a home opener is certainly good for them. And really, it's a good test right off the bat, man, to get them ready and see where they stack up against some of the better teams in the NFC there with the Rams and the Seahawks, like you said. So I'm pumped for it.
Cody, I don't know if you have the schedule there on front of you. Is there any particular stretch that stands out to you that might be maybe make or break, that might be particularly difficult or particularly easy? And maybe following on from that, do you have one team in mind that you can guarantee to be now today that the Colts are going to beat them in the season?
Well, I think Houston, obviously. Look at Houston. They didn't pick to round 3 and they picked a quarterback. So I think that tells you all you need to know. But I don't have a schedule right in front of me. I apologize for that. But I do think right in the middle of that stretch, if you talked about with a lot of those division games there, I think that's going to be the tough stretch for the Colts, really having to prove, hey, we run the South. They haven't won the South in years, and the Colts really are aware of that, and they really want to take it back from Tennessee, who obviously won last year. So I think that's going to be the toughest test. If they can come out of that relatively healthy, I think that's a major win going into the bye week. But yeah, that is going to be the biggest stretch right there in the middle of that 13-game stretch, like you talked about, facing against some of the hot teams, right? Some of the big teams in the AFC. That for me is going to be the toughest part of their schedule.
Yeah, it's definitely the first couple of weeks. I personally, I think that's probably the hardest one. We mentioned Seahawks and Rams the first 2 weeks, then away in the divisional matchup against the Titans. Then you're going away again to face the Dolphins. Then you're back. Then you're playing a third game away in a row, actually, against the Ravens. So those first 5 weeks are definitely very tough, and it's going to you're going to have to really perform well to sort of set up yourself well for the rest of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Colts, like I said earlier, they've struggled at the beginning of the season to really get off to great starts. So I think this will be good. If they can get off to a really good start and beat some of those really good teams or take some of those really good teams to the wire, I think that can only build their confidence as the back end of their schedule starts to get a little bit easier. Some of the competition they're facing isn't the Ravens, right? Isn't the Seahawks, isn't the Rams. It's some of the easier teams, I guess you could say, on their schedule. So I think if they can get through and have a pretty decent record at that point, I think, man, the sky's the limit for this team, especially if they get some guys back, get some guys healthy for a playoff run. I think it's certainly a good setup for them going into the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think definitely the end of the season probably is a little easier to get through with. You know, you got the Houston Texans in Houston, then you got your bye week, like we mentioned, and then you've got the Patriots at home. We don't know what sort of Patriots that's going to be. Is it going to be last season's Patriots, or will Mac Jones be under center by that stage, and will he be, performing well there? We've got the Cardinals, probably the weakest out of 4 NFC West sides. That's just my own biased view. You don't have to agree with me if you don't want to on that. But then you got the Raiders and then Jacksonville to finish off. So definitely a chance to get to possibly win out at the end of the season to put yourself in good nick for a division title.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the Colts didn't have a great record against some of those winning teams last year. So I think this will certainly be a good test to see where they're at. I mean, on paper, it seems like they've improved the areas they need to improve on. So it's like, okay, how much more have they improved? And is it enough to win those games instead of losing, those close losses to some of those teams that they lost to? So that I think that's the biggest question mark there.
Yeah, you mentioned that the Colts have improved in a lot of places that they need to improve. And what would you say was your biggest need to improve in? And who was it? I'm assuming you'd probably say quarterback, and Carson Wentz is probably at least a little bit of an upgrade. It could be Kwity Paye on the edge that we your draft pick. Who would you say, in your opinion, would be the kind of the best pickup overall?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Carson Wentz, you don't know. He had a rough season last year, but I think from an offensive standpoint, this opens your offense up so much more than it was in 2020. Carson Wentz can do so much for you. He can run it. He can pass it. I mean, he can quarterback sneak it. Phillip Rivers wasn't doing those things last year for you. To no fault of his own, he's nearly 40 years old, right? On a bum toe for most of the season. So, the upgrade there in terms of a physical standpoint is massive. I mean, it's giant. And I think there's a lot of confidence, even though he had a bad season last year, that combination with Frank Reich is really going to do him wonders, and also the team that's built around him. When you looked at Philadelphia the last couple of years, it seems like they never had an offensive line. They really never had a running game, and they really never had a defense. They really never had a team around Carson Wentz for one reason or another. Majority of it was they were all injured. But yeah, I think he's set up so well to succeed. It's almost like, how can he not succeed in this Colts offense and with the coaching staff and with everything they built around him? But also, you mentioned Kwity Paye. I think he was a huge need on this defense. I mean, we all know about DeForest Buckner, the kind of player that he is. I mean, I would argue, and you guys know the NFC very well, I would argue behind Aaron Donald, he's right up there with the best of the defensive tackles, the 3 technique. I mean, he is just incredible. Some of the things that he did, the Vikings game last year, for example, just basically destroying a guard. And he's just that type of player, man, where he can come in the double team and he can still make an impact. But the biggest need undoubtedly on defense was pass rush. Colts obviously felt that way very strongly, picking not one edge rusher, but 2 edge rushers back to back in rounds 1 and 2, and electing to sign Eric Fisher, obviously, and in free agency just to solve their offensive tackle position, which was also a need. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of think that Costanzo maybe was playing the whole year. That wasn't the case. He was in and out a lot. Colts had to do a lot of plug and play. Now, they were fortunate enough to find a couple guys that could fill in and be serviceable for them. But Eric Fisher undoubtedly is an upgraded offensive tackle from what they had last year. I mean, even when Costanzo was healthy, he wasn't near the level that Eric Fisher was last year. So Colts are very confident in that, the recovery process from that Achilles injury. So I think they feel very confident that he's going to come back and maybe not miss as much time as some people are predicting. So I think those were the three biggest positions in my mind. I thought quarterback, obviously it drives the offense. Edge rush was most important on defense. Obviously offensive tackle with Costanzo retiring. And the Colts filled all those. And honestly, I feel like it may not show up right away, especially on the pass rush side because Kwity Paye is a rookie. But I think you're setting yourself up long-term for a lot more success down the road for the next 5-10 years. So I think that's why on paper, in my mind, the Colts really upgraded in a lot of ways that they needed to upgrade.
Yeah, I thought the Eric Fisher signing was a good one. I was waiting for a team who would sign him, and obviously with the injury, you don't know who's going to take that risk maybe to sign him. But obviously, he might come back hopefully as early as possible. But even if he comes back a little later, and you're making a push for a playoff spot, you've just got to upgrade an instant impact player on the tackle. That coming into a time when a lot of players are getting injured. So that I just thought that was fantastic. Like that's a good forward thinking signing.
It is. And the Colts also signed Sam Teve, who everybody thinks will be maybe the filling guy there for a couple weeks until Fisher is ready to go. And, Teve's not obviously what I wouldn't want him, and the Colts wouldn't want him to start for the whole season, but I think he can fill in where needed. He's not going to be a liability, right? He's going to be probably an average to maybe below average starter, but he's still not going to be what they had last year, right? Whenever their offensive tackles went down, you were like, this game's over. Like these guys literally cannot block. Like I could get past these guys. That's how bad it was at a certain point. So I think the depth standpoint also is something that a lot of people aren't talking about on the offensive line, but that is something the Colts really, really improved on. And that was probably their biggest Achilles heel last year on that offensive line was just the lack of depth.
Yeah, Cody, you've spoken a lot about that offensive line. And for me, I think that's the biggest key to Wentz working out in Indianapolis is that massive upgrade he has at offensive line. Not only because it gives him that kind of reassurance, but also he's had that issue in Philadelphia of maybe holding onto the ball a little bit too long. And if you can coach that back a little bit, but also give him an offensive line that lets him use that time to his advantage. He showed in the Eagles in those first couple of years, he can be very dangerous with the ball. And one thing that's going to help him out as well, I think, is probably the running game. What did you think of the running game last season? I know you guys drafted Jonathan Taylor. He was highly touted coming out of college. I might be wrong here, but my sense is he didn't maybe live up to expectations that the Colts were maybe hoping from. Do you expect him to bounce on a little bit? And how do you think the run game is set up as it stands at the moment?
Yeah, well, certainly at the beginning, I think a lot of people were underwhelmed by Jonathan Taylor. He had 100-yard game against Minnesota and then really was losing snaps to guys he shouldn't be losing snaps to at that point, especially because Mac went out, obviously week 1 there. But he really came on strong the second half of the season. Outside of Derrick Henry, he was statistically the best running back in the league last year. I think in the second half of the season, I should say. And he finished
third in rushing yards. Was he overall?
Yeah, he finished third in rushing yards at the end of the day and capped it off with like a 250+ yard performance against Jacksonville, and then a couple weeks before that, 150+ yard game against the Raiders. So this guy was really popping off. He was really fine coming into his own. You bring back Marlon Mack as well, who people forget in 2019 was the 1,000-yard rusher as well, and then you add in Nyheim Hines, who is a very, very dangerous threat in the backfield, right? From a receiving standpoint. I mean, he led the team in receptions last year. The Colts running backs were doing so much for this offense last year, and you add in Mack now again. I mean, I think, this is exactly kind of guys what we saw what the Eagles did when they had Carson Wentz and why they were so successful. Obviously, Carson Wentz playing at a high level, but they had a running back by committee, right? They had 4 guys. They just kept subbing in, and really defenses couldn't stop it. And so I think the Colts are trying to go the similar route there and really just helping all these guys, especially now with 17 games, helping to keep these guys fresh so they can just wear teams down. And Wentz doesn't have to play hero ball like he did last year for the majority of the season. That's exactly what the Colts did last year with Phillip Rivers a lot of times, right? It's like the games when Phillip would have to play hero ball, it didn't go the greatest, right? When the Colts were able to complement him well, he really got into a rhythm, and he really played fantastic at the second half of the season when that running game really started to come alive. And I think the same thing, if the Colts running game can continue off of what it was doing at the end of 2020, I think Carson Wentz is going to be so much better than he was this last season.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the running game. It was definitely a strong point of the offense for the Colts last year. And with sort of Rivers, and like you were mentioning with his age and sort of his limitations, sort of wide receiver sort of took had to take a little bit of a back step than previous years, and like T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal and obviously Michael Pittman, who only had one touchdown last year. They sort of had to take a step back. You drafted a 7th rounder this year in Mike Strachan. And he'll go in there with Paris Campbell there as well, who hopefully can leave his injury issues behind him. Mm-hmm. What is there room maybe to bring another person in there? Because you mentioned on your own show, I caught there a couple of days ago that you spoke about Julio Jones, and obviously all the news at the moment is that the Falcons are open to trading him for, it looks like a 2nd round will do it, but is it too much of a risk to maybe give a 2nd round to the Falcons for Julio, mostly just because it looks like you'll probably lose next year's first due to the Carson Wentz deal, providing he does play, I think it's 75% of the snaps for next season. So losing your first and your 2nd round for next year's draft, will that probably be too high of a price to pay, along with obviously the massive contract that Jones would be on?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think the Colts still have some positions that they're not 100% sure on. And obviously every year there's a position that you really want to address and hit it hardcore. Yeah, I think you hit it right there on the head. Like, you may have you depending on what happens with Wentz, you hope it's a 1st rounder if you're a Colts fan. Then you're out a 1st rounder. Then you'd be out a 2nd rounder. I mean, Julio Jones, as great as he has been, and I don't want to say he has, because he's been one of the best receivers in the NFL. But he's 32 years old. That contract, I know a lot of people say don't worry about contracts, but I kind of am, because he's one of the highest paid receivers in the NFL, right? So something has to give there. If you trade for Julio Jones, are you not re-signing like Nyheim Hines or somebody like that? Somebody who's a homegrown guy that's young and is continuing to get better and better. I think just for me, a lot of people feel like the Colts receiving core, while I agree, doesn't have right now on paper a number 1 true threat. I think there's a lot to like about this receiving core. I mean, T.Y. Hilton last year, a lot of people said he had a bad year. I don't think he did. I just think the way that Phillip Rivers spreads the ball around, he's not going to have what the type of numbers that he had with Andrew Luck. I think that's just a natural thing with how Phil spreads the ball around. Michael Pittman, like you mentioned, I mean, he started to come on strong, especially in that playoff game against Buffalo. He was really coming into his own, and the Colts feel really good about him. You mentioned Paris Campbell. He's a weapon when he's healthy. Problem is he hasn't been healthy, but the Colts have some other options too that I feel pretty good about. Zach Pascal's another name. He's just been a solid receiver as well. So the receiving game isn't, they don't have incredible receivers, right? At least right now, but I think it's good enough to feel good about it, right? You feel pretty good about your receivers and also your tight ends as well. The Colts drafted a tight end. So I don't know. I'm not like overly impressed with the wide receivers, but it's certainly something where I don't think it needs to be a Julio Jones like trade to go get a number 1 receiver, because I think Michael Pittman, I think the Colts feel like he has a chance to ascend into that number 1 spot this season.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned about the tight ends, because obviously Wentz had a fantastic relationship with Zach Ertz for a long time there with the Eagles. And looking at, especially last season, I saw Mo Ali Cox sort of seemed to be that red zone threat for Phillip Rivers. You'd be hoping that he can continue the same sort of work there with Wentz this year.
Yeah, you would. I mean, this guy is ginormous. He's 6'6", like 280 pounds. I was actually shocked that the Colts kind of went away from him as the season went on, because he's such a big target. But I think that will hopefully, bode well for Carson Wentz. because he has a big target in him. He has a big target in Pittman now. That's something that I think the Colts really needed to do a better job of last year, is using their big body receivers in the red zone. They just really didn't, right? We saw a couple years ago with Andrew Luck and Eric Ebron, for example. I mean, look what happened there. He had double-digit touchdowns and was a fantastic red zone threat. And I think adding the element that is Carson Wentz will really help, hopefully, this red zone efficiency. And a guy like Mo Cox, certainly, I think he has a really good chance to really benefit from a quarterback like Carson Wentz for sure.
Cody, given all the changes that we've talked about over the offseason, obviously quarterback's a big one. We've talked about the offensive line. As you said, the running backs by committee were getting really hot at the end of the season. How do you expect the Colts offense to look next season? Do you think it's going to progress in terms of, obviously, we know Phillip Rivers is very accurate, spreads the ball around, but doesn't have these big pop plays on offense. He was much more of a kind of a calm manager of the game. Is it going to be let Wentz go and play? Is it going to be look at the running backs and get Wentz to spread it when he needs to? How do you expect the Colts to look on offense this season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do expect them to sprinkle in a good amount of that running game, especially early, to kind of help Carson Wentz ease into it. I mean, the Colts have even admitted it's going to take time. It took time with Phillip Rivers to get comfortable. It's going to take time for Carson Wentz to feel fully comfortable in that offense. And I do think, it's just going to it's going to be a very balanced offense, I feel like. The Colts were very balanced last year. I think they were 11th and 11th in both passing and running, so they were pretty good on both. But I certainly think just your offense in general, like they talked about, is just opened up so much more. I certainly think there'll be more big plays down the field with the arm that Carson Wentz has. But also I think there could be a lot more, maybe not a lot more, but there could be some more turnovers, right? There could be some more of what Carson kind of does that, kind of similar to Andrew Luck. Sometimes he tries to fit stuff into windows where maybe he should just throw it away. And that's something that Frank Reich, credit to him, I think he really coached that out of Andrew Luck the one season he had him. And that's why I kind of feel confident in what Frank Reich can do with Carson Wentz, right? Some of those tendencies, to do the things like we talked about, some of those negative things. I think Frank Reich, being a former quarterback, he understands that, and he's going to really help out Carson Wentz in a lot of ways. But, I mean, I think it just kind of comes with the territory. When you throw the ball down the field, and when you have that type of quarterback like Carson Wentz, he's kind of a gunslinger sometimes. So sometimes you'll be like, what in the world was that? But I think the spectacular plays will certainly be up a lot more. And just adding that complement to the run game. I mean, this is basically going to be something we haven't seen in a long time from this Colts offense, potentially. Obviously, depends on what Wentz does, but potentially could be a very, very balanced attack.
T.Y. Hilton might have an 80-yarder this season. Keep your eye on that. That might be a good bet.
He was asked about, is he going to get 1,000 yards? He said, absolutely. So he's got his sights set high for this season. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I want to speak about a little bit on the defense and primarily Darius Leonard, because in the years that he's been in the league, he's shown that he is one of the top linebackers in the game. And he's coming up to his contract now at the moment, and do you know of any talks that have gone on with the Colts, and has there been preliminary sort of negotiations over a new deal?
I think it's going to happen this summer based off of what I've heard from Darius Leonard and just the conversations that he's had with when people have asked him, when media have asked him. I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Same with Braden Smith. I mean, both those guys are going to get extended. They're going to get paid as some of the top players at their position. I really think they are. I think they've earned it. But yeah, I foresee the Colts for sure. Those two guys in particular are locks to get re-signed sooner rather than later in my mind.
Yeah, and last season, obviously, we know the Colts finished 11-5, second in the division. Only due to a tiebreaker, they had the same record as the Titans. So, what would be sort of progress for this coming year? Obviously, last year, defeat in the wild card weekend game against the Bills. Is it a minimum playoffs again this coming year?
It's tough because it's like with a new quarterback, you're just like, but I think just getting Carson Wentz back to even 2019 form is a big win in my opinion. Just getting your quarterback back to top 15 quarterback play, I think would be huge. So I think what that looks like is 11 to 12 wins, maybe a playoff win or two, that would be a win, major win for me. But even if because like the Colts, let's be honest, the Colts kind of got screwed playing one of the best teams. Even with that 11-5 record, they had to play one of the top teams in the AFC. So, and they took them down to the wire. So I think if you certainly can do that again, I would obviously love to win a game or two. But I think right there, if your team can get to that point, I think that's a big win because you can just continue to build off of what you've already built there. So in my mind, kind of a similar record, but maybe a playoff win, I think would be a major success in 2021.
Yeah, definitely sucks when you don't have like an NFC East side that you can play. Like
hang on a minute.
Right.
We don't need to go.
Position
We don't need to go insulting people's team choices.
Don't worry,
here
Jake.
podcast.
He's still just nervous about.
I don't
the
even
fact
want to
that-
ask his opinion on the Eagles. Oh my word!
Yeah.
They have
that's
screwed
okay.
you guys over.
We have great. Yeah, no, actually, we were more afraid of Carson Wentz than we are of Jalen Hurts. So I'm okay with losing Carson Wentz.
How'd you feel about being screwed out of a playoff spot and then also the Eagles getting Devontae Smith?
Cody, I thought we had an agreement. We wouldn't speak about that. And we'll never
Sorry.
bring that up again. And it hurts. It hurts. I'm not going to lie to you. It hurts.
Fionn has nothing to say. He's just happy there in the corner.
I'm just waiting for us
Just
to
keep
win.
smiling.
The
Just
first
keep smiling.
repeat champ since like 2005 or something
Get
ridiculous.
over
in this.
yourself. Get
Fitz
over
magic,
yourself.
baby. Fitz
It's magic. It's tragic. You get over yourself. We are going to see 31 for 31 from Fitztragic. The Giants are going to sweep the football team, and all is well in the world.
Fitz magic to outplay Wilson this season.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Homer
Yeah,
eyes.
it's going to be a big year. It's going to be a
Why,
big year.
is Wilson going to go down in week 1 or something?
He's
Is that
talking
the only
maybe
way it'll
Zach
happen?
He's already off the cliff, Dara. He's already off the cliff.
Oh man.
But listen, Cody, before we let you go, where can people find your show and your socials?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Twitter I'm at CP Felger 55, podcast at BTJ Pod, also on Facebook, on Instagram as well for the podcast. And then we're basically anywhere you listen to podcasts at, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all that kind of stuff. We're there. And then also on YouTube, Bring the Juice podcast. You can just search it or just search Colts podcast. I think we show up as one of the top ones there. So you can find us there as well.
Excellent stuff. And listen, Cody, we really appreciate you taking the time out to speak to us today. We hope we can speak to you again, if not before the season starts, maybe after week 1 when the Seahawks beat the Colts. Maybe we can break that game down a little bit. We'll see what happens there, especially because you made me feel a little better about playing the Colts when you mentioned that sort of run that you have of not winning opening day games. So I feel a little better now about that week 1 matchup for sure.
We already know the
bad.
Seahawks' weakness is things named Colt McCoy. Colts are going to beat them. I'm on Cody's side on this one.
Well, I don't know with your defense. I mean, I don't know, man. We might have a field day on offense.
That defense is going to be sneakily good next year. They put a lot of
Jamal
money into
Adams
their
better be
D-line.
very fit because he's going to have to play every position.
It's okay. He's got Quandre Diggs there looking after him. He's all
Ooh.
good. He's all good. Don't worry. Look, listen, you just worry about your 30-something-year-old quarterback just watching his beard grow while he's
My
throwing
30-something-year-old quarterback is going to have one of the best defenses in the NFL. I don't think he's too worried.
Did you know
Right
you were
field
that
position.
He'll be on the
Right
pitch
field
for 50
position.
out of 60 minutes because he won't be. He'll keep turning the ball over. So
The only reason Fitzmagic won't have a load of yards this season is because the defense gives him half fields every game. That's why he won't have that
I
yard.
hope Chase Young can play quarterback because you will need a good quarterback.
That
on
Wildcat
roster.
will be insane.
It would be actually scary. I would not be tackling Chase Young.
But listen, like I said, Cody, thanks so much for coming on. And before we go, if you haven't already, can you please like this video and subscribe to the Under Center podcast? If you prefer listening to the audio version of the show, just go to wherever you get your podcast, search the exact same thing, Under Center Podcast. Twitter and Instagram is at Under Center Pod. We are on the quest for 1,000 followers before week 1 of the regular season. So if you are listening or watching, you haven't followed us on either one of those platforms yet, make sure you do, which will help us out a great deal. But that's all the time we have for this week. We'll be back again soon with another off-season show, looking at another team, looking forward to the 2021 season. Lads, thank you so much as always.
Thank you very much.
And once again, we'll be back with you next week. So until then, stay safe and we'll see you soon.